He didn't think he was signing away his future. He thought he was solving a problem. That was the difference between us. He saw a problem. I saw my daughter. I was 31 when I met him at a conference in Nashville. I was there representing the accounting firm I'd worked at for 6 years. He was the keynote speaker, the kind of man who fills a room before he even walks into it. 54 years old, silver at his temples, the sort of voice that makes people lean forward without realizing they're doing it. His name was on 3 buildings in this city and a foundation that funded children's hospitals across 4 states. Everyone in that ballroom knew who he was. I didn't think much of him that first evening. He was charming in the way powerful men often are, deliberate, calibrated, like they've practiced warmth the way other people practice presentations. We ended up at the same table during the dinner reception. He asked what I did. I told him. He actually listened, which surprised me. Most men like him don't. We exchanged cards. He called 3 days later. I won't tell you I wasn't flattered. I was. I'm human. He was intelligent, he was interested, and for the first few months he was genuinely kind. He took me to places I'd never been. He remembered things I said in passing, the name of my college roommate, the fact that I hated cilantro, that my mother had died when I was 19. He paid attention. I mistook that for caring. Looking back, I think he collected details about people the way some men collect watches, because knowing things about you gave him leverage. I didn't understand that yet. By spring we were serious, or at least I thought we were. He never said the word relationship. I noticed that, but I explained it away. He was private. He was busy. He had a complicated past. I had 100 little explanations I'd constructed to keep myself from asking the one question that mattered. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in April. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could drive. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, more from the sudden weight of something real landing in the middle of a life I'd thought I understood. I was 31. I had savings. I had a job I was good at. I was not, in any practical sense, unprepared. But I was terrified of telling him. I called him that evening. I didn't dress it up. I said, I'm pregnant. I said, it's yours. I said, I've thought about what I want, and I'm keeping her. I didn't know it was a her yet, but I already knew. There was a silence on his end that lasted long enough that I pulled the phone away from my ear to check if the call had dropped. Then he said, I see. Like I'd informed him of a scheduling conflict. He asked if we could meet in person. I said yes. He said he'd send a car. I said I'd drive myself. We met at his house, not the one in the city, the one outside it. The one with the circular driveway and the kind of quiet that money buys. He poured himself a drink. He didn't offer me one. I sat across from him at a table that probably cost more than my car, and I watched him think. What he said next, I've replayed so many times that the edges have worn smooth. He said he wasn't in a position to be a father. He said his life was structured around certain commitments. He said he wanted to help me, and then he named a number, $400,000. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was already typed up. An NDA, a release of paternity claims, a clause about no future contact. He'd had it prepared before I arrived. He knew what he was going to offer before I walked through his door. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I looked at him. You had this ready, I said. He didn't answer that. He picked up his drink. I folded the paper in half, put it in my bag, stood up and told him I'd be in touch. I drove home with the heat on even though it wasn't cold. My hands were steady by then. Something had settled in me. Not anger, exactly. Anger is hot. This was different. This was the cold, clear feeling of knowing exactly where I stood. I called my friend Rosie that night. Rosie has known me since we were 14, and she has a gift for saying the right thing with minimal fuss. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was what I needed. When I finished, she said, You need a family law attorney. Not a general practice guy, someone who does this specifically. I said I knew. She said, Do you have anyone in mind? I didn't, but I knew someone who would. My coworker, Denny, had gone through a difficult divorce 2 years earlier, one that involved a business partner and a custody dispute and enough complexity that he'd had to hire a specialist. He gave me a name the next morning without asking why I needed it. He just wrote it on a post-it and stuck it to my monitor. That's the kind of person Denny is. The attorney's name was Margaret Lynn. She had an office downtown on the 14th floor with a view of the river and a manner that reminded me of a surgeon. Efficient, precise, no wasted movement. She read the paper I'd been handed in about 90 seconds. Then she set it down and looked at me. He gave you this before you'd said a word, she said. Before I sat down, I said. She nodded slowly. That tells me a lot about how he operates. She asked me several questions: dates, documentation, what I had in writing versus what had been said verbally. I'd saved everything. 6 months of texts and emails, some of which included him referencing our relationship explicitly. I'm not a sentimental person, I keep records. Margaret said we had a strong case for establishing paternity and filing for child support. She explained how support is calculated in our state, income-based with adjustments for the child's anticipated needs, and she was clear with me that in high-asset cases, the number can be significant, not symbolic, actual. He's going to make this difficult, I said. They always do, she said. That's what the process is for. I asked about prenatal DNA testing. I'd done some research and knew it was possible. Non-invasive, a blood draw from me, and a cheek swab or blood sample from him. Margaret confirmed it could be done, and that results were court admissible. She said we could petition for it, which would require him to comply or explain to a judge why he wouldn't. I asked what the timeline looked like. She said faster than he's hoping. That afternoon, she filed. I won't pretend the next few months were easy. They weren't. I was pregnant and working full-time and going through legal proceedings, and there were days when I ate dinner standing at my kitchen counter because I didn't have the energy to sit down. My back hurt. My ankles swelled. I cried exactly twice. Once in the second trimester when I had a scare that turned out to be nothing, and once in a parking lot outside a prenatal appointment when a song came on the radio that my mother used to like. Both times I cried for about 4 minutes and then I stopped, because I didn't have the bandwidth for more than that. He hired 3 attorneys. I know because Margaret told me, and because his first response to our filing was a 37-page motion full of language I didn't entirely understand, but that Margaret translated as delay, discredit, and make it expensive. He didn't know I had the texts. His attorneys sent a counterproposal 6 weeks in. He was willing to increase the payment to $800,000, a one-time settlement with the same terms as before. Full release, no future contact, no legal paternity established. I sent back one sentence through Margaret. My client declines and will see you in court. I heard later, through Margaret who'd heard it from his lead attorney, that he didn't take that well. The prenatal DNA test came back at 99.998% probability of paternity. Margaret filed it with the court the same week. His attorney spent 2 months attempting to challenge the admissibility. The judge, a woman in her late 50s who had clearly seen every variation of this argument, denied all of it in about 2 paragraphs. My daughter was born in October, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark eyes, a full head of hair. I named her on my own. I'd thought about that carefully. I didn't want a name that felt like a compromise or a negotiation. I named her after my mother. She was 6 weeks old when we went back to court for the support hearing. He sat across the room in a suit that probably cost $5,000 and stared at the table. He didn't look at me. His attorneys did most of the talking. Margaret did better talking. The judge calculated support based on his documented income, which was substantial, plus provisions for healthcare, childcare, and education. The monthly figure was not a number I had let myself hope for, because I'd learned by then that hoping for specific numbers leads to specific disappointments. But when the judge read it out, I felt my shoulders drop about 2 inches. It was real. It was documented. It was enforceable. He was required to establish legal paternity, which meant his name went on her birth certificate whether he wanted it there or not. His attorneys had fought that too, and lost. Outside the courthouse, Margaret shook my hand. She said, "You were a very good client." I said, "You were a very good attorney." We stood there for a second in the November cold, and then I went to get my daughter from my neighbor, who had kept her for the morning, and I drove home. I want to tell you that moment felt triumphant. The movies would want it to feel that way, but mostly it felt quiet. Like something that had been very loud had finally gone still. He has never reached out to ask about her. Not once. That doesn't surprise me. It did, briefly, in the early weeks, when I'd imagined scenarios where he came around, where some instinct kicked in. But that's not who he is. He is a man who saw a problem and tried to pay for it to go away. When that didn't work, he complied with what the court required and nothing more. I have stopped expecting anything beyond that. What I did not expect was how much that would stop mattering. My daughter's is walking now. She walks like she has somewhere very important to be, and she's already slightly annoyed about the trip. She has my mother's eyes and what I suspect is her own personality entirely, one I'm only beginning to understand. She reaches for things she wants. She has very clear opinions about which stuffed animal belongs next to her at any given moment. She has not, as far as I can tell, any awareness that any of this happened. That is the thing about children. They do not know the circumstances of their arrival. They only know what they're arriving into. I did not go to court for revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think people hear stories like this and assume that's what drives you. The satisfaction of making someone pay, the thrill of watching someone powerful lose. Maybe for some people it is. It wasn't for me. I went to court because my daughter deserved to have her existence acknowledged. Because the law exists precisely for situations where someone with more power than you tries to use that power to make you invisible. Because I am not in a position to be a father is a feeling, not a legal standing. He was not in a position to decide that she didn't exist. That was always the court's job, and the court did it. There are practical things I'd tell you if you're in something like this. Get an attorney who specializes, not a friend's cousin who does mostly wills and closings, an actual family law specialist. Keep everything in writing. Do not let anyone tell you that accepting a lump sum is smarter, or kinder, or more dignified than pursuing what you're legally entitled to. A one-time payment ends. Child support adjusts. Your child's needs will grow. Know that prenatal paternity testing is available in most states. It is non-invasive for the mother. It is court admissible. It removes the argument of "we'll deal with this after the birth," which is a delay tactic, not a reasonable request. Know that in high-income cases, child support is not capped the way some people assume. Some states have caps on the income used to calculate support. Some don't. Your attorney will know which applies to you. Ask specifically, and know, because no one told me this and I wish they had, that you will be okay. Not in the generic way people say that when they don't know what else to offer. I mean specifically. The fear that lives in your chest in those early weeks, the one that says you cannot do this alone, that you are not enough, that you have made a choice that will cost you more than you can pay, that fear is loud and it is wrong. You will do things you didn't know you could do. You will get up on 4 hours of sleep and go to work and make decisions and come home and do it again. You will have days when you feel like you are running on nothing but stubbornness and cold coffee. Those days will be enough. I am not telling you it will be easy. I am telling you it will be yours. My daughter laughed for the first time on a Sunday morning in December, a real laugh, the whole body kind that babies do when something genuinely delights them. I was making a ridiculous face. She found it hilarious. I thought about the man in that house with the circular driveway. I thought about the piece of paper he'd slid across the table, already typed, already waiting. I thought, he will never hear that laugh. Not because I'll keep her from him. The court hasn't ordered visitation because he hasn't requested it. If he ever does, we'll handle that when it comes. But right now, in this moment, in this apartment with the Sunday light coming through the kitchen window, that laugh belongs to me, to us. That is what he gave up when he slid that paper across the table. I hope somewhere in whatever quiet his money buys, he knows it.